So in this video I just want to take a look at an interesting case I've come across there to do with an email service provider and defamatory emails. DRM Contract Administration Limited versus Proton Technologies. It's a High Court decision. The background is that certain emails were sent alleging certain things against the owner of a company, I think in Kilkenny, and basically the emails which were sent to various parties were defamatory, and defamatory of the managing director or chief executive or moving spirit behind the company, which is involved in roads, contracts and so on. Basically the allegation was that the man in charge was on the take and was getting a cut from subcontractors and all sorts of stuff of that nature. Allegations that would be seriously injurious to anybody's reputation if they were held up and were true. And obviously this gentleman wanted to sue for defamation, but he couldn't identify who was behind the emails or who was behind the ProtonMail account. So he contacted Proton Technologies. They're an email service provider based in Switzerland, looking for the identity of the individual behind the account. And of course they, like all email companies and similar service providers, stated that they couldn't divulge the identity of the person without some sort of a court order being in place. Between the jigs and the reels, this gentleman or his company brought High Court summons, plenary summons, against Proton Technologies AG, and suing for defamation. And his statement of claim, he was looking for 10 million euros for reputational damage and so on. Now, the law or the justice system in Switzerland is slightly different from Ireland, and Proton Technologies had internal legal counsel who was not familiar with the Irish legal system and procedures and so on. You would think that he may have sought advice from Irish solicitors, but when he looked for quotations and that type of thing, he took the view that they couldn't afford it, they were only a start-up company, and in any event, if this occurred in Switzerland, then the very fact that they didn't enter an appearance wouldn't necessarily mean that a judgment would be entered against them. In Switzerland, the court itself or the judges would get involved at an early stage and perhaps prevent judgment from being handed down or pronounced. But in Ireland, the situation is different. So Proton Technologies, the email crowd, made the tactical decision not to enter an appearance. And that being the case, DRM Contract Administration Limited, the plaintiff, could go ahead and actually obtain judgment in default against Proton Technologies, the email crowd. So it ended up in the High Court in August there, where Proton were then represented by a firm of solicitors in Ireland, a big firm, and they were basically looking to have the judgment set aside. Now, there was an argument about whether the original service of proceedings were regular or irregular, and the judge found that they were irregular. The judge also found, though, that the Proton Technologies, the email crowd, would probably have or would have a strong defence if it went to a full hearing and so on. So the High Court set aside the judgment that was ordered or that was given in default, and it did allow DRM Contract Administration to renew the plenary summons, because at this stage, this originally started off in 2018, and if the service was irregular, which is what the judge has found in this case in the High Court in August 2021, then if DRM contract administration were to pursue the defamation proceedings, they have to renew their summons, but they're way out of time to do that. But the judge gave them the opportunity to renew it because of the exceptional circumstances in this particular case. But it's interesting, or the other interesting part of it is this: Proton Technologies have a good defence, as I mentioned there, and the good defence is this: as an email company, they have an exemption under the domestic e-commerce regulations. So a mere conduit exemption states that an intermediary service provider shall not be liable for information transmitted by him or her in a communication network if they're basically passing on the information. So that is a sort of an exemption that would apply to email companies. In other words, Gmail and others as well, Microsoft, whatever Microsoft's email crowd company is called. There's also another exemption there. It's in relation to caching information under the domestic e-commerce regulations. An intermediary service provider shall not be liable for the automatic, intermediate and temporary storage of information which is performed for the sole purpose of making more efficient that information's onward transmission to other users of the service upon their request. The bottom line is that there is an exemption there for email companies in relation to emails which may be or may contain defamatory allegations and material, and that is probably going to be the defence, which, if this thing goes ahead, the plaintiff, having renewed the summons, will go ahead. If they pursue it further, then the defence they're going to meet is that the email company Proton is simply covered by this domestic e-commerce regulations, which gives them the mere conduit exemption and the cache of information exemption, exemption. It's an interesting case, but obviously a lot of people will be very upset about stuff that might be sent through emails and so on, but I think it's fairly clear that there is an exemption for email companies, and whoever you might sue in relation to defamatory allegations or material, etc., arising from emails, you're going to be probably wasting your time suing the email company. Now, obviously, you will have to obtain the identity of the person who is sending the emails from the email company, but that will involve an application to the High Court for a Norwich Pharmacal order, which will be an order against the email company, if you're successful, ordering them to disclose information about the sender of the emails. Hope you find this video useful. I would appreciate if you gave it the thumbs up down below. Thanks a lot.